Hey guys, my name is Matt and I'm a product manager at the Times and Sunday Times newspapers at News UK. Now I'm going to do a talk to you about technology today, and I'm going to try and do it in a way that doesn't sound too much like how do you do fellow kids. But I do recognize that I am, as far as you're concerned, quite old, 30, and you guys probably have potentially a better grasp on how technology is changing your lives than I do. But from a business perspective, I'd like to just tell you how much technology is likely to change your potential outcomes in the business and the world of your careers. And that's because technology is changing rapidly, as you'll recognize, and I think is going to be embedded in every part of every career that we have in the future. Something I've been saying for a couple of years now is that technology is going to absolutely transform every industry. Regardless of what you thought you were previously, you are probably going to end up in some way a technology business, or at least a business that has a heavy component of technology. And that's because of some of the really, really super cool capabilities that modern technology brings. And I'm super, super excited for the future and how that's going to change it even further. So the talk today is how every business is a technology business. And firstly, I want to introduce you to this guy. This guy's name is Mark Andreessen. He's probably not someone you maybe know, but he's quite famous in the world of tech, not least for his oddly shaped head. In Silicon Valley, on the west coast of America in California, there is a group of people called venture capitalists, and they typically have an enormous amount of money that has been given to them or loaned to them by a bunch of other people who want to invest in technology businesses. And technology businesses are potentially quite risky. There's no potential guarantee of success. So the idea of venture capital is to try and find the businesses that will succeed and give them lots of money. And they fail a lot, but sometimes they hit it really big with businesses like Facebook or Twitter. But Mark Andreessen, he runs one of these funds basically with his partner, and he said something that is quite profound and I think really sums up this talk. And his phrase is, software is eating the world. And by that, what he means is that software, the code that we write that runs in computers, that changes how things work, is going to be a massive component of how the world works in the future. You can already see it today in how just over the last year during the COVID pandemic, the countries that have had the most innovative use of technology in the way they've solved some of their problems are the countries that have potentially fared the best against the crisis. You've had systems that have modeled out the pandemic. If it were to continue to spread, what would happen, how many people would be infected, what would be the effect on hospitals, things like that. And those models are software, and they are written to try and predict what's going to happen in the future. You've also had countries that have used technology such as in Korea and the Far East, where smartphone apps have made a really, really big dent on being able to trace individuals around. So once you've found someone who's been infected, you can see the places that they've been and the restaurants they've eaten at and stuff. So you can go and see the other people who've done that as well and try to lock things down as quickly as possible. So software is a really, really cool thing. And it's not just going to be, the stuff of web apps and things in the future, but it will probably be in everything that we do. And the Internet of Things as a massive network of internet-connected items around the home is a likely growing sector that will become a more important part of your lives, I imagine, than I think anyone really wants, potentially. But this story about software eating the world, I want to tell in a nice, entertaining way, and I hope this is entertaining enough. I hope you've heard about Gamestop, a company which had no business being valued at the valuation that it was at in January of this year. Gamestop, which was known for a time as GameStonk, was a company that sold video games in America and was on a kind of downward turn. COVID had affected a lot of sales, malls were closing, there was lower footfall in their stores, they weren't making a huge amount of money. A lot of investors bet against them, and those bets were suggesting that the stock was going to fall in price. Now, a bunch of activist retail investors, people like you or I, with a bit of money in their pockets, decided to get together on the internet and buy Gamestop stock. The whole idea of this was to drive up the price of the stock, so the hedge funds who had bet against it going down would have to buy the stock back and make these people a lot of money. For some people it worked, for some people they lost quite a lot. Not something I would be recommending. This is not investment advice, that's for sure. But the cool thing that happened as a result of this crazy implosion in the stock price is the change in culture that happened for the world around stock trading. Where we previously thought of stock trading as something that was relegated to banks and people with a lot of money and people with money that they could afford to not only buy the stock with, but also pay for the expensive brokerage fees, which could go up to £30 per transaction. You know, these things were suddenly open to everyone. And why were they open to everyone? Well, it was not just kind of the news outlets reporting on it that enabled people to go and buy out the stocks. It was the change of technology that was available. It's the change that has happened as a result of software to the business of stock trading. Like every other business that will likely change in the future, this was radically changed and big events happened as a result of the introduction of new technology. So Reddit, for example, was the forum that everyone corralled around in order to talk about the stock and what price it was at and all these kinds of things. Free Trade and Robinhood were investment applications that drastically reduced the cost of entering the market, that, you know, you didn't have to pay massive brokerage fees anymore. And things like Trading 212 equally provided similar options. So now I want to talk about how media has changed, which is the industry I'm in. I mean, it's unlikely that any of you realistically have read a newspaper in its printed form, or potentially, you know, have parents who have read newspapers in their printed form for a significant portion of their lives. I grew up and my parents read newspapers occasionally, but I know that their parents read newspapers all the time. And this is clearly, you know, an industry that is in great flux. I think the interesting part about media is how technology has changed that consumption habit. So it's no longer people that are necessarily buying newspapers, but it's people who are going online to read their news. It's people who are consuming their news via apps or via sites like Reddit and other aggregators that exist online. When media started, mass media started, the technology that disrupted or provided that innovation was the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. And this is a rough sketch of, I think, what one looked like back in the day. Nowadays, it's a bit larger. I went to the News UK printing site in Broxbourne, which is a massive warehouse complex which prints millions of newspapers a day. They have enormous reels of prints provided from, I think, Norway and other countries being shipped across the world. They've got massive, massive tanks of ink which are piped at high pressures all around the plant. And they've got, as you can see, thousands of newspapers running along these automated carousels and then getting packaged up to be sent out to retailers. It's a huge, huge task. When I was a student, I was really interested in media as well, but I didn't have any of this kind of stuff available to me. So I was trying to work out what kinds of things I could do that would enable me to compete with companies that had millions and millions and millions of pounds able to set up all of these things. And I hope this is of interest to you, because I think the solutions that I found are probably even more accessible to you than they are to me. And there'll be solutions that are undiscovered yet that you guys could come up with as well. What I came up with was this idea that if I went on protests and things where I could take photos and then put the photos online, I need a way of getting those photos online from my big camera, my SLR, which I got for my birthday. So I found this SD card that connected over Wi-Fi to a netbook, which was then a very, very tiny computer that I put in my backpack. And I stuck the netbook on all the time, and I had the camera transmit via Wi-Fi to the netbook when I took photos. And then every now and again I stopped, whipped the netbook out of my backpack, quick type, and my update was on my blog. And this is what my blog looked like back in the day, my student blog when I was doing all these protest coverage. all of that stuff was really, really accessible and really, really easy to do because of the technology that has been enabled. And if you just think about the kinds of capabilities that sites like the New York Times or Mail Online with millions of visitors a day need now to keep up with that demand and that number of stories that are being published and the kinds of things that journalists want to be able to do with their stories, it's a really, really interesting world to be in, where we're doing more than just finding interesting SD cards to put in our cameras, but we're trying to think of a new and smart ways of serving high-resolution images and video and things like that. So my last thing I want to say is a kind of point of inspiration, is that I'm very jealous of you guys. There's never been a better time to start with this, and there'll never be a better time for you to try it out than today. This was the kinds of tooling that I had to work with just 10 years ago. I had to upload files to a remote server that I paid £10 a month for out of my pocket money, that I had to scrounge around from my little jobs and things. I had to use a weird notepad application. I had to connect to everything via this green on black terminal software. It was difficult, and there wasn't much, although the internet existed and there were places online you could find out about it, there is nowhere near the amount of content there is today to teach you about how to do these things. Now you have so many cool things available to you. You can buy a Raspberry Pi computer for about $30, and that is a more powerful computer than I had 10 years ago by a long way. You could do some really cool stuff on that. You could create web scrapers or little notification bots and things like that send you stuff on WhatsApp. It's awesome. There's GitHub for you to find code and use other people's code and see what other people's code looks like. There's NPM and Node.js where you can write everything in one language for both, your animations on your website and the things that power the data that goes into your website. And you've also got things like glitch.com, which I would strongly recommend you go and check out. It's a really cool community of people learning to code together, which is totally free. And you can just go online, create a little website for yourself and play around with it. And you see it update in real time. And you can see exactly what is going on and how it's affected by what you write. So thanks for listening. And if you've got any questions or you want to ask me how else to kind of get started in this, or some other suggestions potentially about stuff you could do, or you've got some really cool ideas on how media can change what we do to provide better for younger people, please send me an email. It's matt@tk.gg. Thanks very much, guys.